With all pan bolts torqued tight, time to spin the motor back over. Continue putting the top end together. The first step is to place the cam followers, I call them the valve lifters, where they'll be going. Noting that we will be placing new lifters in cylinder number 3. Since the new lifters and cam lobes are dry, I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on the tappet surface. I'm going to try to dip it into a little bit of oil as well, just so it'll slide in the hole. So we have both on the lifter. A little more lube. It seems to stay on there just fine. A little bit of oil. And I think we'll continue that process with the others. Now we'll clean the oil off of that block surface. Get it ready for the head gasket. Now, because I like oil, I'm going to put another little coat on this upper part of the cylinder walls, because after we've been turning the engine over, we might have taken some off of there. I don't think you can have too much. I'll rotate the engine and put some in there. I'll rotate the crank so that number 1 cylinder is at top dead center. That should be ready for setting the valve clearance on cylinder 1. Note that I'm installing the intake manifold on the head before setting it on the block. And here's why. The 220 manual says to remove the intake manifold prior to taking the head off, and that would be fine except for this one bolt that's down behind the injection pump. The rest of them are fairly easy to get to with a socket and an extension. But that one back down in there is pretty well impossible to get to. Unless you take the injection pump and housing off, which requires taking the whole front of the motor off. I just don't know how you get in there to get to that bolt without a special tool. So that's why I left the intake manifold on when I removed the head, and I'm going to put the intake manifold back on the head before installing it. Since we'll be treating the new engine to a new set of injectors, I'll pull the heat protectors, bronze washers, and clean the bores before setting the head. This will make sure that any contaminants don't drop into the cylinders. I just used a Torx screwdriver handle. Go through there, and you can go off to the side, or you can try going through the hole and just tap it out. I think I found a 12 gauge brush, and force it down in there. I just use a pair of pliers. It'll clean the threads and the flange. Okay, just kind of work it around. Do that a few times. Pull her out. Blow it out and ready, good to go. And we'll see if any dirt fell out. There we are. That would have gone down the cylinder. So we'll get some air and blow it out for good. When installing the head gasket, make sure the oil passage and gasket is located over oil passage near number 1 cylinder in the block. With the head gasket on and installed correctly so the oil passage is clear, the intake manifold bolts have been torqued, injector holes have been cleared. It's time to set the head. Time to put the head bolts in. Again, coat the threads and bolts with oil. First thing I'll do is just speed them down to engage the head. No pressure. Do it in the sequence so I can practice. So the tightening sequence will get a little bit long, but we'll just give you the high spots. So the first, we're going to come down to 14 foot-pounds. Now the next round, we're going to go to 28 pounds. And 14. Now for the last round, I'm going to take the extension off. And we're going to dial her up 45 foot-pounds. £45 foot-pounds. Before putting the caps on the valves, I just put a little dab of oil on them and put them in order that they were removed. Now we go in with the push rods. Now it's time to install the rockers. We'll make sure that the push rods are seated as we tighten the rockers down. The springs get compressed. Note that I didn't disassemble the rocker shaft, so the set screw that keeps the shaft from rotating and keeps the oil passage open was never changed. But if you take the rocker apart, there's a set screw that needs to go through into an indent in that shaft to make sure it gets oil. These are 12 millimeters. We're eventually going to torque them down to 19 foot-pounds. But I like to do this in a series. Well, we break out the snap-on again and we dial back to 19. There we are. I left cylinder 1 at top dead center so we can do a rough check on these that are loose right now. There's still plenty of clearance. Since these valves are set just to where they were when we did the piston to head clearance test, I'm going to see if we can get a different measurement to see how much the head gasket might be thicker than the original. There's 12. Still a little clearance. Try 14. 15. There's at least 15 thousandths where we had 8 before. So I'll loosen these and tighten them down. If my mind is working correctly, we're about 8 thousandths looser than we were before, which would mean that that head gasket is about 8 thousandths thicker, which would even give us more piston to head clearance than originally thought. So you can drink some iced tea and fiddle around with this as much as you want. Check her again. I'm going to go just a little bit tighter, and that might work out when I tighten this nut. I can get a little bit more. So I don't want to take your time to do all of this, but you get the idea. Well, the next task is to install the injectors. So we'll get a couple of the bronze washers freed from their plastic. And the heat shield. The washers and heat protector are installed this way on the injector. So one of the bronze washers is put in the hole, then the heat protector pointing down, the next bronze washer, and then simply install the injector. Note that I was able to remove heat protectors by pushing them out through the pre-combustion chamber. If you're changing injectors, the 220 recommends changing heat shields and bronze washers, but you're on your own to figure out a way to pull the heat shields. Maybe a strong pick or screw. There's quite a bit of room below them to improvise some type of extractor. Injector nozzles are torqued to 37 pound-feet. Many socket sets only go to 19 millimeters, the size of the injector body. There may be a tendency to use a 19 to tighten the injector nozzle into the head, but the injector is assembled at only 30 pound-feet and will be over-tightened if a 19 millimeter socket is used to torque the nozzle to 37. Just pick up a 21 millimeter deep socket and do it right. If you're like me, you have a good basic set of tools, but probably lack the ones with part numbers listed in OEM parts books. On 755s, the number 2 injection line presents a problem when loosening the 17 millimeter line connector and holding the delivery valve with a second wrench. The fittings are uncomfortably too close together. In the disassembly video, I showed how I backed a box end along the line to the delivery valve and then loosening the line nut, only after having the lines to cylinders 1 and 3 out of the way. I'll be installing the injection lines in the opposite way, beginning with cylinder 2. The delivery valves are probably still tight, but I'm going to hold them just in case. And we'll leave the nuts loose at the injectors to help us bleed the lines. At this time, we're ready to close her up and set the engine aside, waiting for the next order of business.